of you have made it, despite probably being in the final sprint before Christmas. We will do everything possible that the sacrifice actually was worth it. We have speakers excited and ready to inspire you. Let us shortly introduce ourselves as hosts. So my name is Ivan. I'm co-founder and CEO of Deskbird. Deskbird is a Swiss startup with approximately 10 people, all of them remote and all of them spread around the world. Our main product is an app to find and book co-working spaces fully flexible, for example, for 1 hour. And we want to enable people to work in places they love. We believe that our understanding of the office will change significantly in the future, and we want to shape the new way of working, and that's why also we are very interested in the topic around the future of work. Then hand over to Bilge.
Hi everyone, this is Bilge Apak. I'm the CEO of event.com. It's a B2B platform for facilitators, business coaches, and future skills trainers. We help companies to make their workforce ready for future, basically. And I'm also co-founder of Shake Up the Workplace. Shake Up the Workplace is an initiative which started as an unconference in Zurich, and it's aiming to make positive impact to future of work by bringing people, change makers together. And actually this event is a collaboration with Deskbird today as an output of this Shakers community, as well as Deskbird is part of this change makers group. I think in the context of remote work, it's very important that you are also part of a community outside of your organization. So please feel free to check our website and be part of the community while it's still free of charge. And as a passionate person about positive impact, I believe the future is of those who are daring unapologetically. And today we have two of those people here, Cédric and Sara, who are going to enlighten us with their remote work experiences today. And I'll be at the chat. If you have any questions, you can directly ask me or to everyone, and I'll make sure that these are taken care of. And I'm handing back over to Ivan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Bilge. Before we hand over to the speakers, just like what is the goal of this whole talk series of the Future of Work talk? The goal is basically to inspire you around the future of work by giving stage to speakers who are on the edge around the topic of the future of work, and who will provide you with some fresh ideas and with some thought-provoking ideas. What is the format? The format is very simple. So it's each event has, as a first part, very crisp talks from our thought-leading speakers. And then as a second part, we have Q&A based on the received questions from the audience. And the whole event should not exceed 45 minutes. We know that everyone is busy, so we'll sure to make it inspiring and crisp. Let's go to the first talk of today. The topic is, what can we learn from remote companies? And we have, as a first speaker, we have Cédric Waldburger. He's entrepreneur, startup investor, essentialist. And what's interesting is that he only invests in remote first companies. And then we have Sara Krumminga. She is people and organization lead at Komoot, who is a remote first startup with now 70 people. But I think Sara will talk about in more detail about it, and she will talk about the topic how to build a strong remote culture. And then as the second part, we'll have questions from the audience within our Q&A session, and then we'll wrap it up and finish it by 5:15. That's it from the host. Then I'll hand over, and looking forward to the first talk, Cédric Waldburger.
Good stuff. let me share my screen. 1 second. So I've heard inspiring ideas, provocative ideas, inspiration. Glad that there's no pressure a week before Christmas to do something, but I'll try my best. So hey everyone, very nice meeting all of you. And Ivan has already said a few words about who I am and what I do. In one sentence, I'm very fascinated by startups. A couple of decades ago, when I was 14, I started my first company, and since then I've always been involved in startups one way or another, either as a co-founder, early employee, or more recently as an investor. And what you see here is that I not only think about the future of work from time to time, but pretty much any day I think about the future of life and how our life could be simplified, be more focused, more conscious, and what is the impact that I want to have. And so at some point along my journey, I decided to give up on everything except for the things that fit into my backpack. Those were 64 things that you see around me here when I gave up on having a home a few years ago. I now do have a home. Luckily for COVID, I did get a place, but for a few years I was traveling constantly, just circling the globe. And now let me see if I can switch it. Yeah, so one thing that has led to these sometimes more and sometimes less extreme experiments is that I am fascinated with simple questions that don't always have a simple answer. And I'll show you one or two examples later on, but they have led to things like giving up on a home, living just 64 things, and for a while I was traveling a crazy amount. This is my travel map from 2017. Over 120 flights, which means roughly every 2 to 3 days I switch places. And it wasn't much fun. I spent about 25 full days just on airplanes that year. The only good thing was that as a kid, I always wanted to become an astronaut. And I realized that that year alone, I covered about 80% of the distance between Earth and the moon. To give you a bit of insights in like where I've stopped in my journey and what I've worked on, I was born and raised here in Switzerland, went to university here, started my first company here, then moved around a bit. First joined a company in New York, then a few companies in Germany, went to Hong Kong to study there, then came back to Switzerland and started investing. And then after being an investor for 2-3 years, I realized that I wanted to go back into the driver's seat. I had so many ideas that I felt needed to be brought to life. And one of the companies that I started back then, Zentask, was a fully remote company. Another company that I started or helped start is Dfinity, which is a company that builds decentralized infrastructure. So the theme of remote and decentralization has been in my life for quite a while. The first time I started to work remote is 12 years ago when I moved to New York while still running a business here in Switzerland. And Ivan asked me to share a couple learnings from that journey when it comes to remote work. So one of the questions that at some point tripped me when I was already living without a home was, does my company actually need an office? We were thinking about starting Zentask, and in the past it had been normal for me to use the hybrid model where we would have an office, we would have a core of the team in one place, and then we would add freelancers and specialists from all over the world. But at this point, this was 2016, I realized that probably it doesn't even make that much sense to even have an office anymore. And maybe we can quickly open up the chat if you guys can leave a few notes based on your personal experience. I think this year we've all had the experience of what it means working remote, even if it was just near shore. What do you think are potential problems and potential benefits of not having an office? What is it that you've experienced? What was hard? What was super easy? You can also just unmute yourself and chime in if you have ideas. Yeah, so one factor is missing is one that I saw. Yeah.
I've been working in a remote only startup for a year now, and part of the people get really hungry for that personal contact eventually. And the team themselves, they said, look, we're going to get together whether anybody likes it or not. And we're going to do it about once every 2 or 3 months, was what they kind of found as a rhythm. And they just felt so energized after that full day together, you know, and it would carry them to the next one. But I'm just wondering, how can one bridge that gap? Maybe not 100%, but at least a little bit along the way. And there's something about the in-person that's providing the spontaneity that somehow the remote tends to be missing, because remote, we tend to make an appointment for the meeting. So does an open team room somehow sort of always online and always camera on and just sort of forget about it, and that way they can have the spontaneous, oh, hey, John, you're here as well, how you doing, kind of event?
Great share. Thanks so much for sharing your experience, John. And I think you're very much on point with what I've experienced in those last few years. And I've been following the chat, and if I had to summarize the last few statements, on the pro side we have flexibility, efficiency, and focus, and on the downside we have what I call it culture, but you could say the fun in the team or the interpersonal connection. And so that was my experience as well. On one hand, I realized that it worked really well for companies that needed not much more than this in order to be productive. So as long as you have Wi-Fi and electricity, you could do your work. I also experienced along the way that it doesn't work so well for companies that do have a physical component or have a sales organization where sales happen in person more efficiently than they do over video or the phone. One learning that I've made for myself is that it was a lot easier for me as the CEO and founder of the company to focus not on what's urgent, but on what's important. And why is that? Because in a regular office setup, typically the way it was set up is, even though I was working over here and someone had just started and was a few desks this way, they would, before dealing with a hard problem where they could help themselves, they would rather just walk over, tip me on the shoulder and ask me. And so that created a lot of interruptions. And that's something that was removed from this environment. On the other hand, what I realized, and John, you touched on this, is how do you create this interpersonal connection in your day-to-day? And for us, it's been by using Tandem, or you also mentioned it, like keeping Zoom open for some times of the day where you can see each other and just spontaneously talk to one another. I don't think we have a secret formula, and I'll come back to this a bit later, but I think the key is to just keep trying and creating these experiences. Another thing that I've learned is that for me, I was the CEO, but I think it's probably true for pretty much any role in the company. For me, my role is just two things, and it became a lot easier to see this in the remote setup. Number one, I'm the pilot of the company, meaning I got to make sure we're at the right altitude, going the right direction. And then second, and that's really the role that I've often overlooked in the past, is my priority is, or my job is just to make sure everyone has a setup and an environment where they can be most productive. So instead of trying to jump into product meetings or sales or trying to help people with individual things, I made sure I took more time to think about how can I create an environment that works well for everyone, both people that are very far away as well as people that are just a few miles away. And then last but not least, and interesting that you found a similar rhythm, we learned that every about 90 days, every 3 months, we want to get together. Here, we were a very international team, so when we did get together, we usually got together for about 7 days. And we used half of that time, the mornings, to plan the next 90 days. So when we went back, everyone had a very clear vision of what they had to achieve. And then we used the other half of the day to create experiences. Sometimes we went and played escape rooms. And other times I took the guys surprise skydiving. I told them we were going to go for brunch, and instead we drove to the airport. Also learned that not everyone liked extreme surprises as much as I did. And so I had to adjust a bit after one person didn't want to jump. And I realized that once again that company, and I love the English word for company because it also means that the company that you're building this with. In German, the word Gesellschaft comes close, but often we say Firma, which means signature. I think doesn't really portray what a company should really be. It's especially in early stage ventures, which is where I spend my time. It's all about the team. It's all about creating that culture. And so just because culture is so important, another question that bugged me for about 6 months after it first got stuck in my head was, how should we hire now that we're a fully remote company? Because if I approached hiring the way I did it in the past, is I would write a job description, put it out there, wait for resumes to come in, put them on a stack, and then I would try and go through them from top to bottom. But I realized at the top of the stack, I was sharp, I was giving them all my attention, but then at least latest after like 4 or 5 applications, my energy level drops, I'm not as attentive. And so if I had to go through a stack of like 30 to 50 applications, there was no way I was going to treat everyone fairly and equally. Plus, now that we hire remotely, we have access to a talent pool that's at least 100 times bigger than any individual city. And so it's not really feasible for me to go through that stack anyway. So what did we learn? How did we redesign the process? We write a job briefing that's goes into a lot more detail than what I was used to. We cover not only what the role looks like, but also we try to give an idea of what our culture looks like. And then very important, and that's the one thing that I want to share with you. Well, we put it on all these platforms. We get about 800 applications for a generic role. And before I come to what I want to share, what do you guys think is the #1 skill that you should hire for, independent of the role, when you hire in a remote company or in a remote setup? Again, you've probably experienced this year. What do you think is that #1 skill? I see collaboration, communication, learning ability, self-management, empathy, adopting. Self-management. Yeah, and I think this all centers around a term that we coined as communication. You got to be good at listening and communicating, especially because I rely on everyone on the team to proactively let me know if there's a problem, if they're blocked by something, and ideally communicate a solution as well. So we asked ourselves, how can we have candidates kind of self-assess them and self-eliminate those that don't fit that requirement of who is a good communicator. And the trick that we use is a tripwire. So at the end of this briefing, which is takes you about 10 minutes to read word by word, which is a lot, but also not too much to ask if you're really interested in this role. The very last sentence reads, please start your bid with, hey Cédric, I'm the virtual assistant you're looking for. How many do you think fail? How many out of 1,000, just to get even numbers, out of 1,000 applicants, how many do you think fail? Bill could just said 90%, 700. Yeah, so that would mean 70%, 60%, 80%, 95%, 85, 99. Yeah. So it's not as bad as 99, but some of you were really close. For us, experience has shown that it's about 85% that do not get that right. And it's very easy for us to automatically filter for them. So that was one of the hacks that we used in order to make that process scalable and quicker.
Did you just coldly shut them off when they didn't do that right at the beginning? Did you say, sorry, you've already failed?
Yeah, we don't even reply to them. It's an automatic email rule. Like if the bid doesn't include that word, like it's just they've missed. And so
got it. Thanks.
Of course, yeah, the process is a bit longer, but we don't have too much time here. Happy to direct you to the blog post or talk about this individually. But in the end, what we've learned is we've gotten down the process to less than what I would spend in a traditional setup before I was working remotely. It typically takes us about 3 hours to get roughly 12 hours to get from 800 candidates to just the top 3. And it only takes about 3 hours of my time in that process, which was really good for us. It allowed us to scale pretty quickly. And the message I want to leave you with is, I think remote work is different. It's not just offline work put in a remote or online setup. So I think the fun and also where the leverage is to, instead of just trying to copy an offline experience, it's to reinvent it. see it as an opportunity to have a blank slate approach, to completely rethink how you've been doing things. And that's what I want to leave you with. Happy to chat more if anyone's interested, but thanks for inviting me, Ivan and Bilge, and thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks a lot, Cédric. Great talk. And we'll definitely also incorporate your recruiting hack in future. And also thanks a lot to all the messages we've received. I think on your first question, Cédric, there was a lot about the personal connection actually missing in a remote setup. I think this is a very good transition to Sara, who will talk about how you actually build a culture, even if you're a remote first company. And so I think this is good to directly hand it over to our second speaker, Sara.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. I agree. This is a great sort of jumping off point for me. So my name is Sara. I'm the People and Organization Manager at Komoot, and I'd like to talk about how to build a strong remote culture. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes, cool. So just a little bit about Komoot. We are the largest outdoor platform in Europe and offer navigation for hiking, cycling, and trail running, and offer inspirational content to get people outside exploring the outdoors even more. And most importantly for this talk is that we are a fully remote, fully dispersed team of 65 people working in more than 40 cities in Europe. So just a bit about our history. We actually were not founded originally as a remote company. We actually started in Potsdam, which is a small city outside of Berlin, in 2010. And for many years, we had sort of this mixed remote in office format. But in 2017, I think everyone kind of got sick of the hour-long commute to Potsdam. And so the team decided to implement a fully remote first policy. At that point, there were about 24 people in the team, and now 4 years later, we're almost 70 people all around Europe. So what that looks like now is this. We're really all over the place and growing more and more every day. So how do we actually make it work? Well, we've identified a few sort of key components of our remote culture. The first is that we're remote first. So this means we have no physical office. Everyone is in a remote setup. And we do that because we in that way, everyone has equal access and opportunity to participate. We use some of these tools or all of these tools below. And these really enable us to do all the work that we could do in an office remotely. Basically, the philosophy is there's nothing we can't do remotely. We also focus a lot on communication. So communication is a core value for the whole company, but we also have some simple communication standards to keep our remote work functioning well. So the key piece of that is having a core time. So between 10 and 3 p.m., everyone in the company is online and available to respond. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is we focus a lot on personal connections. So we're constantly thinking about how we can build strong relationships among the team. And that's really what I want to focus on for my time here today. So why is this important? Probably all of you already have some ideas. Most of us, or many of us, have been working remotely now for a few months. And it really changes the way that we sort of interact as people. So building those personal connections is really essential to increasing trust in a remote team. We also think a lot about decreasing barriers. So it can sometimes be hard anyway to sort of reach out to someone you don't know well and ask them a question. In a fully remote setup, that becomes exponentially difficult. So by getting to know people personally and building some sort of relationship with them, we want to try to lower that bar of that barrier of communication so that you feel free and able and confident to reach out to anybody that you're working with. And lastly, we think it's super important to understand the context that people are working in. So sort of looking beyond what you just see in this little box and understanding sort of what's going on outside of that screen, whether it's family stuff or I don't know, just like the weather even, especially in COVID, this became super important to understand people's different experiences in different levels of lockdown. So extending beyond just the screen and having a full understanding of one another is important to working well. So how do we actually do it? Well, we basically spend a lot of time to getting to know each other. Throughout the week, we have ongoing activities. So these are basically optional events that you can join in on, and these are changing all the time. Some examples of this are a weekly meditation. We have a weekly Among Us game, which I still haven't figured out how to play, but I'm learning slowly. Basically just anything that someone can think of that might be fun. We offer an open invitation to people in the team. Then we also have more structured formats for communication. We have weekly one-on-ones basically throughout the company. And this is through a tool called Donut, which basically pairs two people together and asks them to just meet up during the week on Zoom for a coffee or a donut or some kind of break together. And this is a little bit more like formal. I mean, it's pretty relaxed, but you are just kind of talking face to face, which works really well for some people and is maybe more challenging for others. But at the end of the day, you walk away having learned something like a little bit more about your colleagues that you might not have known before. And finally, this is something that sort of was mentioned before by Cédric and John. We also think it's super important to meet in real life when we can, which is why we have all hands or all company gatherings 3 times a year. So we bring the whole team together to different locations around Europe every 4 months and basically spend a week just getting to know each other better. We also do some like lots of different stuff. So we'll do some workshops, but this is not really the time to just do our regular jobs together. Instead, we really try to kind of step outside of our normal roles and think about how we're working, looking back on what we've done, and also looking ahead at what's to come. We share and learn a lot from each other. So we have something called Commute University, where people will lead like an hour session about a huge variety of things like, I don't know, coding stuff, but also hobbies and personal interests like how to travel the world for 200 euros. This is also just a super nice way to see what kind of hidden talents people in the team actually have. And then lastly, we just do stuff together. We're an outdoors company, so most of the people working here really like to be active and be outside and do things. So this is a really fun time for us to just do that stuff together and also have time to be together without necessarily talking. So finding sort of time and silence or even without communication to really just build trust and get to know each other. That's just another picture there, I guess. Of course, in 2020, we had to cancel our in-person events, which is a huge bummer and has been difficult. For sure, as soon as we can, we're going to bring them back. But in the meantime, we basically decided nothing can stop us from having fun. So we found a way to transition our gatherings into a remote format. We actually made a little video about it, which I think is linked in the event posting, so you can check that out later. But basically, we started to rethink how we could connect remotely. So our workshops were pretty easy. We can move that online with tools like Miro, where we can collaborate and work together. Commute University also could go online pretty easily, and we tried to make this as interactive as possible. So you're not just sitting in front of your screen and watching, but you actually are doing something at home and in your own space as well. And finally, we keep doing stuff. So we're cyclists. The biggest thing we did together was Swift, I think it's called. I'm not a cyclist personally, but finding ways to do stuff sort of alone, but still share it with other people. So maybe go out for a ride and come together afterwards and just kind of talk about it and share what you did. As far as how it's going, I would say it's working quite well. We did a wellness survey a couple of months ago, and the team has rated their overall well-being at 4 out of 5 stars, which given the current circumstances, we're quite happy with. As an employer, we're getting a 4.9 rating on Glassdoor, so good feedback from just sort of what it's like to work here. And finally, on a product level, our app is growing rapidly and also receiving high marks in the App Store. So overall, we think this is working quite well, and we're pretty happy with the results. And yeah, just as some closing words, our sort of product mantra is we want to change the way people explore, but we're also pretty passionate about also changing the way people work. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Very cool. Great talk, Sara. Thanks a lot. Fantastic. Let's directly jump into the Q&A. So Q&A part. First question, I think it's a personal question to Cédric. Would be, how did you manage this year when travel has been so difficult?
Yeah, so I was traveling, I think until March 13 when the lockdown was announced here in Switzerland, and then I came back to Switzerland, and since then I've been more or less here. I spent the summer in Portugal interacting with startups there, but other than that, I've spent a lot of time in Switzerland, which was great for a number of reasons. I didn't get to stay in one place for more than a month, I think in the last 6 or 7 years, so it's been really good to build routines and just be healthier as well without the constant change. And then also I became a dad for the first time a couple of months ago. So it's actually been COVID, or this year has been really good to me. I got to spend lots of time, first with my wife when she was pregnant, and now also with our little daughter. So couldn't have come at a better time for me. So overall, I do miss the excitement of immersing myself in a new culture and meeting new people from time to time. But on the flip side, it's been a very good timing for me.
Well, thanks for that. Then question to Sara. Do you think that a remote first company has its limits in terms of company size? I mean, you have been growing quite impressively already, but do you think that also a company of, let's say, 10,000, 50,000, or even 100,000 employees could also be remote first?
Yeah, I definitely think it's possible and totally, yeah, more than doable. I would say go for it. I think at a certain point, like we're reaching the point where we don't have contact between every single person. When we were 30 people, we all knew each other. It felt really like one team. Now already we have to split it up a little bit, which is a little sad just as a part of that. But on the other hand, it's like we know these pods have a lot of strength within them. So on a small scale, they can really get close and connect on these smaller scales. And then we can just sort of like incorporate that into the bigger team through consistent check-ins and exchanges. And I would still vote for at least one company-wide meeting per year, just so you have a chance to really be one unit in some ways.
Maybe just to add to that, one thing that I realized is that you need to document processes and systems and how you do things and how you think about the world a bit earlier in a remote setup. At least I've seen that a few times. You need to be a lot more explicit with how you see the world and where you want to go. But then once you do that, it becomes much easier to scale. So things that before in an in-office setup only had been required or necessary when we hit like 30 people was now necessary at like 5 to 10 people already. But then it also really allowed us to scale on the back end.
Very, very interesting. I think it touches up on the next question. Maybe also Cédric can answer. It's like, what do you think are the most critical factors that need to be in place for a company to actually go remote first?
I think it definitely, so first I would look at the business model. If it's a software business that just by its nature can be built in a remote setup. That is definitely a requirement. And then I think second is just mindset. To have, like, I've had a conversation with those teams that we took remote after first having an office. I've had very open conversations about the fears, the problems, the potential downsides of not having an office anymore. And we made sure we address them as a group, as a team. And then I'd say pretty much any business can go remote.
Cool. Another question that we received, maybe towards Sarah, how do you actually get people excited about the company's roadmap in a remote setting? Companies can be company's roadmap, can be also strategy, can be the vision. How do you do these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, we tried to give some sort of strategy presentation at each gathering, and that is generally combined with hopefully maybe some champagne even. So we share a lot on our gatherings, but on top of that, we also do a weekly all company meeting. So every week we have a chance to hear from different parts of the company and really know what is going on a company-wide level. But definitely, yeah, like as Cédric mentioned before, like you need to have everything very transparent and make everything accessible to all people. So on top of presentations and weekly meetings and gatherings, we also have all of our internal documents available and accessible to everyone. So you can check out the OKRs from any part of the company and actually see what the goals and the strategy look like.
Cool. So I would say we would open up maybe to some more questions from the audience. I think we have time for one or maybe two more questions. I don't know. So we have one.
Questions on the chat. So if you would like to take the question directly to Sarah or Cédric, please speak up, everyone.
Okay, this one. I mean, if no one's talking, then I'll pick one up from the chat, actually, from Julia. Do you provide your people?
Sorry, I'm happy to ask the question myself. This is the joy of home working, where we have family and cleaning happening at the same time as an online meeting. So maybe there is some background noise, but I'm happy to ask the question. And I think it's Cédric and Sara, if you have any supporting tips or tricks in terms of facilitating that mindset change. I mean, if you sort of, a super young company, startup mentality, younger demographic, I think that change might come a bit easier. But in terms of transforming companies that, where the leadership is also quite set in their ways, what would you say could help to kind of, bring that mindset change about sustainably without sort of falling back into the old way when COVID is over, more or less?
Ladies first, Sarah, if you want to go.
That's a tough one. I think one thing that's really come up since COVID is sort of this divide between people who are really excited to work remote and the ones who didn't. So I do think at the end of the day, like remote might not work for everybody. But in terms of like kind of trying to increase buy-in, I think the biggest thing is just being able to demonstrate that it really works, and that if you have people in a team who are excited about it, or even just curious about it and think they might be excited, that it's not going to ruin your productivity. It's probably actually going to increase it. But you do need to take care of, as Cédric said, not just like putting everything online, but really having a really holistic approach to it and saying like, okay, what does this mean for our team, and how are we going to make this transition?
Yeah, not much to add. When we started to invest in remote first companies with Tomahawk in mid 2019, there's been lots of investors that looked at us with a bit of a funny expression and were like, this is just this trend that's going to go over. And then of course this year came, and now it's became the de facto normal for a lot of us. So my takeaway is to my general approach in life is to experiment often and admit failure often as well. Because I think that's the only way to really learn if something works or doesn't. And that's usually what I try to motivate people, is to just get out of their comfort zone, try something new, talk about it very openly about the pros and cons, and then summarize takeaways as a group.
Thank you.
Maybe one thing to add, I think it's if you have a bigger or a more established organization, it might help to just find one small team, that's a bit more eager and could work as a sort of pilot. And then you can actually promote it company-wide also. That might help, as a start.
Yeah,
good input.
Very cool. There was one more question. I think it's the last one, looking at the time. The question is like, if employees are working in different countries, what legal structure governs actually the working relationship? This is actually a question we have also heard a couple of times in the last weeks.
Yeah, so I can give it a go, and then Sarah, you can add. I mean, there's lots of companies right now that are growing at a rapid pace that provide an employer of record model, meaning they have a local entity that employs people. I think a more traditional name for that is just payrolling companies, and that's what we use that, or sometimes we work with people that have been working remotely for a while, and then they already have their own entity, so they're able to just send us an invoice and they take care of Social Security and everything that is required in their legal framework by themselves. But curious to hear what Sarah's input is.
Yeah, it's also a difficult one, but we're also using local entities. I think the really tricky thing there is depending on where we hire someone from and how quickly we want to get them started. If it's a country we haven't worked in before, then suddenly there's a bit of a race to try to set them up quickly and figure out, like, I don't know, about Social Security in Sweden, which no one ever thought about before. So being able to sort of move quickly and adapt quickly is definitely helpful.
Cool. Looking at the time, let's wrap it up. Thanks once again a lot to the speakers. I know we have set high bars in terms of expectations, as Cédric outlined, but I think it was very inspiring listening to you and seeing you answering those questions. One more thing from our side is that we will send to all the participants, just like after the event, one email where you can provide feedback. We would highly appreciate feedback on this first Future of Work talk. And you will also get a link with the video, with the recording. And yes, basically that's it. We wish you a very enjoyable Christmas break and hopefully see you next year.
Cool. Thanks so much. Good seeing everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Cédric and Sara and Ivan.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
See you in the next talk, everyone. Thank you for joining.